All that scallopini means is thinly sliced meat that's usually pounded even flatter after being sliced. There are dozens of different veal scallopini recipes in Italy, but most Americans think of veal scallopini as being one dish, this one with mushrooms and wine. Well, not exactly this one, because I'm going to show you a couple of tricks and something you've probably never even heard of before in the interpretation of this Italian-American classic. So I'm using regular steel pan. I'm putting in excess of rye flour. Really don't need this much, but rye flour is cheap. Don't put a really small amount or it'll burn easily. You need to have a reasonable amount of flour in there just to keep it from burning. That's also why I'm using a relatively small surface pan here too. If I use a great big giant skillet, now it will be heated unevenly, and also this flour would have to, I'd have to use a lot of flour to keep it a solid layer on the bottom. Stir this frequently. The flour originally contained some moisture, quite a bit of moisture, and as long as you're stirring it, you're going to keep the temperature at the bottom of the pan around the boiling point of water, somewhere around 212 Fahrenheit. You can verify this, if you don't believe me, with an infrared thermometer if you have one. You'll see that as long as you keep stirring this for quite a while, the temperature at the bottom of the pan, as long as you keep the heat on the stove on medium, the temperature at the bottom pan is going to be around 212 because there's still moisture in this flour. The moisture is evaporating though, and you will hit a critical point somewhere after maybe 10 minutes where the moisture is mostly gone. Now, when that happens, now the temperature at the bottom of the pan is going to rise. Also, the amount of flour that you have in the pan is going to determine the amount of time it takes for it to begin really seriously toasting. I just checked the temperature now. It's risen up to about 250, 260. It's been about 15 minutes, and you can see now there's starting to be some smoke that's actually coming off of it, and you can see it's visibly darkening here. So this is only going to go on for maybe another couple minutes. It's going to get dark quickly now. Yeah, it's been just a couple more minutes. The other clue here is the aroma, the smell, but of course I have no way of putting that onto the video, but you can smell the distinct change. There's no point in toasting this only a little bit and driving off a little bit of the moisture, because when you cook it, you're just adding more moisture back to the flour, nothing happened. If you don't toast it to the point where all the moisture has been driven off and it actually begins to toast, you're not accomplishing anything, you're not changing the flavor. But this is what you want to see. It's starting to get smokier and smokier and darker. Now exactly the point that you call it quits and say okay, enough is enough is up to you, but when you start to catch aroma of the first wisps of it actually burning, you're done. You have to be careful not to actually burn it because it'll be bitter. So here we are, it's on about 18 minutes, but the amount of flour I have in here is fairly substantial. If I'd done this with less, I could have probably got this up to this point in about 12 minutes. So this is enough. Now I'm going to transfer it to another container. Now here it is in a container suitable for dredging. Just to show you, here's the color that it started out at. Here's the rye flour that I put in at the beginning. You can see what it ended up being. Caramelized color. Not very dark, not burnt, but definitely darker than it was. It has a beautiful nutty aroma. This needs to be used now. You can't just store this for a long period of time. Really, this should be used almost immediately. If you keep it a few hours, okay. Don't put this in a bottle and store it for a week. You've lost the effect. Now the next step is preparing the base sauce for this. I have the Madeira, the white wine. I've got a shallot here I'm going to cut up. I've got a couple of tablespoons of basil leaves, fresh. This is opal basil. You can use any basil. Same amount of parsley, a couple cloves of garlic. This is an important part. You don't want to use just plain button store mushrooms if you can possibly avoid it. What I've got here are forest mushrooms. I foraged myself last fall. They get cooked down and frozen, and then this way I can preserve them and use them later in the year. Right now there's no mushrooms because it's the middle of winter. But you can also use dry mushrooms that you reconstitute yourself, Or, of course, if they're in season and you're lucky, then you can forget this step and just use like porcini. If you can afford it, or you're in an area where you can get them, then just use porcini for this. But if you can't, and you probably can't, this is the solution. You're going to make the sauce with this. You're going to cook these in butter, grind them up, and it'll become an additional layer of flavor, as you'll see. Now, we've got the same steel pan that the flour was toasted in, and it's got a little bit of kind of fond, a little bit of toasted flour stuck on the bottom there. That's okay. Rather than wash this out, we're just going to keep using it and pick up the flavor from that. So I added a couple tablespoons of butter. Heating the pan here, we're going to let this foam up. And once the pan comes to temperature here, I'm going to add the sliced shallots and some of these mushrooms. Now, the amount of mushrooms that you add here is a matter of personal preference, and also you have to consider that this will affect how the dish looks. If you don't have very much of this, the dish will be more clear looking, but it'll have better flavor if you add a lot. So if aesthetics are important to you, don't use very much of these, because they will make the sauce look kind of cloudy and murky. But if all you care about is flavor, then add more. So I'm going to begin cooking these more here. They were already cooked before I put them in here. If you're using dried mushrooms that you reconstituted yourself, of course they wouldn't have been cooked. Now, in my case here, because these mushrooms were previously cooked before they were frozen, they really don't need very much cooking. It's going to be fine. And the shallots don't need much cooking either, because they're going to be cooked again when they go in with the other mushrooms, as you'll see. So now I'm going to add the garlic, and we'll just stir this for just a few seconds, just to take that really rough edge off of it. We'll just give it a few seconds here. And that's enough. Now I'm going to add the white wine. We're going to bring this up to a simmer here. Also going to add the basil, the parsley. I'm going to bring this up to a simmer here to evaporate off some of the extra alcohol from the wine. In this case, there's still going to be an alcohol taste from the Madeira, but this would be too much if we had it in both the wine and the Madeira. It would taste boozy, and you don't want that. And here we have it after just a couple of minutes. It's come up to a boil. You have to be careful. You got fresh herbs in here. You don't want to drive off all these lovely flavors. Now I'm adding the Madeira to it, and I'm just going to stir it for a few seconds here, and then it's going to go into the cup of the stick blender. Now, this step is not absolutely necessary. If you don't mind it being chunky, then you can ignore this. I don't like it that way. I want the sauce to be smooth. If you're lucky enough to live in a country where they have veal already cut into scallops, then lucky for you. In Russia, you're lucky to get veal at all, and in fact, it's kind of interesting is that the veal is often not as young as it is in other countries. You can tell from the color of this. This isn't as pale as milk-fed veal is in most countries, but it's certainly not as dark as beef either. The cow was somewhere in between the two stages of what we normally call beef and what we normally call veal. But this is going to work. All I'm going to do is I'm going to have to trim off this connective tissue like this and slice it myself, and then we'll pound it. I'm not going to show you the butchery of this. Hopefully you won't need it, because most countries you can buy thinly sliced veal already. Here you can't, so I'm going to do the butcher work myself here in a minute. The next key to this recipe is pounding the veal very flat and very evenly. You've got a mallet like this that's got two sides. You want to begin with the side that's got the ridges on it. There's a reason for this. You're putting holes in it like this, and then when you flip it over and you hit it with the other side, you're going to spread that out. That's going to give it even more tenderizing than if you just flattened it straight away. That's why the mallets have these patterns. But you have to be careful, be gentle, don't try to do it in 4 gigantic slams. It's not a sledgehammer. Your point here is to tear fibers of the meat. Carefully, you don't want to shred the meat so that it falls apart. You want to do them a little bit at a time. In this modern age where you push a button and you get answers and you get upset if your app on your iPhone takes 10 seconds to load, it's tempting to just lose patience and just want to start slamming into it. It's not that sort of operation. It's not going to work. You're going to have to be patient if you want good results here. Yes, it will take you a few minutes on each piece. That's okay. This method is not replaceable by anything else that you're going to have. Yes, there's machines that can do this, and even some restaurants have them where it runs it through a press with teeth like this on one side and then flattens them out on another. Very expensive machine. You don't need that because you're not doing 100 kilograms of this every day. Just be patient, work with it. Now that you have your pounded veal slices, you can play the game I love to play with my children. What country does this look like the most? We have Montenegro, Albania, maybe Slovenia. That's a good way to learn geography. No, not really, but it's true. They do end up looking like different countries in Europe if you know your map of Europe well. So I'm putting some salt on here and ground pepper. I have the toasted rye flour. You really want to dredge these. This is why it was important to toast this flour, because you're going to get a lot of flour in this dish. I got more flour than we need, but that's okay. So you want to have an excess. You don't want to use up the last little scraps of flour on here, or it won't be good. You want to really have it coated well, dredged. And you know, rye flour's cheap. What does the whole bags cost? I don't know what it costs where you're at. In Russia, a giant bag of it costs about 50 cents. So if we waste a few grams of it, that's okay. So really well coated. We have this mixture with the porcini mushrooms and the shallots and everything. Now we're ready to go. Now you cut off the stems of the mushrooms, just the little tip ends of the mushrooms get cut off. Slice them reasonably thin, but not super thin. This is one of the mistakes people often make. You know, you don't get any mouthfeel or bite if you slice these into paper thin pieces. Now I'm going to do something else that's a little bit unconventional. I'm going to heat up a pan, and I'm not going to cook the veal in butter. I'm going to cook it in pure olive oil. And be generous. A lot of flour on that veal that's going to need to soak up some fat in order to cook. Get the oil to about 180 degrees Celsius before you add the veal. Now I've got the heat fairly high here. It's on 8 out of 1 to 10. And this is what it looks like. I'm coming up on 2 minutes here since I added the veal. Pan's getting hotter, of course. Turn it over. And these thin pieces don't take very long to cook. And you don't want to overcook them. Should have a nice dark crust on it, but shouldn't be well done. I mean, like really well done in the middle. And don't forget too, it's going to get a second cooking with the other ingredients. So this has been about 1 more minute on the other side. I'm going to transfer these off to a plate. Now we've got a lovely amount of oil and veal juices to cook our mushrooms in. And they soak them up like sponges, as you can see. I've still got the heat on 8 out of 1 to 10. Let's spread this out a little bit here. I don't want to stack them up too much. And as the veal cools, you can drain some more of the juices onto the mushrooms. As they cook, they'll begin to shrink a little bit. Now I'm going to add some salt to the mushrooms. This will also draw out more moisture. After 3 or 4 minutes, still on relatively high heat, 8 out of 1 to 10, you've got moisture's come out of the mushrooms. They're brown. Now we're going to take this porcini, shallot, wine mixture, the herbs and everything, and add on to this. And cook it like this, just a little bit. Blow off a little bit of the wine that's alcohol in the wine that's left. Check this out. Now, and some of the liquid has evaporated. This has concentrated some. Now you can add the veal back in, reheat it, finish it. This is also what I meant by being murky. See, because of that, those reconstituted porcini mushrooms, this is not a very pretty looking dish. You can put some parsley on it to help make it look better. But if you want it to look even better, you have to sacrifice the flavor and use a lot less porcini, or alternatively, get fresh porcini and use those instead of the mushrooms that you buy in the store. Okay, once this is warmed through, we can serve it. This is what the dish will look like if you used a lot of those frozen porcini mushrooms. If you didn't use so many or none, it'll look better, but it's still a rustic looking dish no matter what. The second volume of my cookbook is now available through Amazon and other booksellers. It covers the YouTube recipes from the last 8 months with more in-depth information. I received requests for the procedures on all recipes, and I've listened to you. Every recipe has step-by-step directions, and of course there are recipes that aren't on YouTube. But this is not just a recipe book. Far from it, as you can see from some of the topics scrolling by here. I'm certain that anyone who watches my channel and any serious cook will find this book a treasury of useful and new information you won't find anywhere else. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.